He was found in his favorite chair, the one with the frayed armrest and the soft imprint of years of habit. The television murmured quietly in the background, a nature documentary flickering across the screen. Nothing looked out of place. No struggle, no panic, just a stillness that felt final. His slippers still warm, the remote still balanced on his lap, and a silence that spoke of something long ignored. The coroner's report stated natural decline, but to those of us who understand how the body speaks before it breaks, the cause was deeper than that. It wasn't cancer. It wasn't heart failure. It was depletion, a slow, silent shrinking of vitality, an inner light that faded out not from illness, but from forgetting how to keep it lit. This man, like so many others, believed he was doing the dignified thing. He thought abstaining from physical pleasure in his later years was a sign of wisdom, of maturity. He thought he had outgrown desire, but what he didn't know, what most men don't, is that neglecting intimacy with oneself in older age can have real biological consequences, not because desire is essential to masculinity, but because arousal, release, and pleasure are built into the maintenance systems of the male body. Ignore them for long enough, and things begin to malfunction, not dramatically at first, but subtly. A crack in the foundation, not a collapse. I'm Dr. Ellis Granger, a men's health specialist with 3 decades in clinical practice, and I've spent the better part of my career helping men over 65 rediscover something they were never told they were allowed to keep: their right to feel alive, not just in mind, but in body. Because what if I told you that many of the issues older men chalk up to normal aging are actually preventable, that they stem not from years passing, but from vital systems being switched off, often voluntarily and unknowingly? This isn't about fantasy. It's not about youth. It's about biology. Your body does not stop needing pleasure just because the world stops expecting you to seek it. In fact, after age 65, certain biological processes become even more dependent on stimulation. And when that's removed completely, whether from lack of interest or outdated moral scripts, the decline isn't symbolic, it's chemical. Let me tell you a story. One man, 72 years old, a retired aerospace engineer, came into my office after experiencing what he called a flat line in my energy. He had no major diagnoses. His vitals were stable, but he no longer felt himself. His voice was slower. His eyes dulled. He said mornings were the hardest, not because of pain, but because of the numbness. "It's like my life got put on mute," he told me. After some tests, conversations, and careful history-taking, the cause became clear. He had stopped engaging in any form of sexual stimulation nearly 4 years earlier. Not out of shame or illness. He simply thought it was time to let that part of his life go. What he didn't know was that the body never really agrees with that decision. It just quietly rewires itself to match. See, the male body thrives on signals. Blood flow, nerve stimulation, hormone release, they all work in response to activity. The moment you withdraw that activity, especially for long periods, those systems begin to scale down. Not all at once, but gradually. Your brain stops sending the signals. Your testicles reduce testosterone production. Your pelvic floor muscles begin to weaken. Your vascular system limits circulation to areas no longer active. And over time, this deactivation doesn't just affect sexual function, it begins affecting who you are. I've spoken to dozens of men who describe this loss as something deeper than just physical. They talk about feeling faded, less sharp, emotionally flat. Some say they struggle to focus, to connect with loved ones, to feel pride. The world grows quieter, less colorful. They don't talk about it with their families. They often don't mention it to their doctors. But the moment I ask if they've remained sexually active, even solo, the truth usually surfaces. No, not for years. That's the pattern, and it's far more common than most realize. But let's clear something up right now. This is not about obsession or dependence. This is about function. You wouldn't stop walking just because you're retired, right? You wouldn't stop eating because you're not going out to dinner anymore. So why do we treat sexual health, especially solo sexual health, as something we should discard with age? The truth is, after 65, Maintaining intimacy with yourself is no longer a luxury, it's a health practice. In this video, I'll take you through 4 specific systems in your body that begin to decline when you stop engaging in personal pleasure. Some are physical, some hormonal, and one is deeply emotional, but all of them are connected. And the most important part? Every single one of them can be maintained with just a small amount of consistent attention. Not indulgence, not fantasy, just awareness, just movement, just intention. And here's something you might not expect. By the end of this, I'll show you how a few minutes of gentle, respectful intimacy each week could extend not only your sexual health, but your mental clarity, your emotional resilience, and even your independence. Because the body listens. It always does. You just have to remember how to speak its language. So let's begin by looking at the first and most immediate consequence of giving up self-pleasure in older age: the weakening of vascular and muscular function in the lower pelvic region, a problem that creeps in slowly, but can rob you of your confidence, your spontaneity, and in some cases, even your mobility. But before we go there, the first change tends to happen in the shadows, quietly, without announcement. It begins with something so small you might not even notice: a missed morning erection, then another, then a week goes by, then a month. You chalk it up to age, maybe stress, maybe a new medication. But what you're really experiencing is a reduction in one of your body's most sensitive feedback loops: pelvic circulation. Think of your penis not as a symbol, but as an organ, an incredibly intricate one that requires regular oxygenation and blood flow to stay healthy. Without stimulation, especially as you get older, that blood flow decreases. When that happens, the tissues inside begin to change. They stiffen, scar, harden, but not in the way you want. I've seen this with patients again and again. Men who used to feel sharp and responsive now report numbness, delay, or total loss of function, not from illness, but from disuse. Imagine what would happen if you stopped using your hands entirely for a year. Your grip would weaken, your joints would stiffen, the muscles would shrink. The same is true for your pelvic floor and erectile tissue. Without regular circulation and movement, these systems begin to decline. It's not theory, it's vascular science. One man I treated, 69 years old and recently retired from his job as a surveyor, told me he started noticing it after a few long road trips. He thought the problem was bad seats in his car. What it really was? 6 months without any sexual activity. The muscle fibers in his erectile tissue were beginning to atrophy. His blood flow response was delayed. He wasn't sick, he was disconnected from himself. This is something most men never see coming because it doesn't come with a warning. There's no announcement, no pain, no signal, just quiet loss. Until one day, a moment that used to spark something inside you doesn't. Now, while this physical fading is alarming, it's not irreversible. But timing is everything. The sooner you bring circulation and stimulation back into the picture, the more you can preserve. That means gentle engagement. No pressure, no expectation, no shame. Just movement, just care. Even once or twice a week. That alone can preserve function for years beyond what most men think is possible. But that's just the beginning. There's another change that comes next. One that's even more powerful than blood flow. Your hormones. When a man stops engaging in any kind of sexual activity, especially solo, his brain gradually lowers its output of certain neurochemicals: dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin, and one more, luteinizing hormone, which plays a critical role in testosterone production. When these drop, the testicles receive less signal to keep producing. Over time, testosterone levels sink, not because of aging alone, but because the message was never sent. This is what happened to a 66-year-old piano teacher I worked with. He told me, "I just don't feel like myself anymore." He hadn't been in a relationship in over a decade, and gradually, his sexual activity faded to nothing. Within a few years, his mood declined. His energy tanked. His motivation disappeared. He thought it was depression, but what it was hormone collapse. We ran his labs. His testosterone levels were less than half of what would be expected for his age. Not dangerously low, but enough to erode his spirit. We started hormone-safe behavioral therapy, which included a regular stimulation routine. Within 6 months, he reported feeling back in the room again, his words. Not because he was chasing pleasure, but because his body remembered how to be alive again. You see, maintaining healthy testosterone isn't just about injections or pills. It's about keeping your internal signaling system alive. And one of the easiest ways to do that is through regular self-engagement. Not every day, not obsessively, just consistently. Your body needs to be reminded that life is still happening. When that reminder fades, the spiral can be rapid. Mood crashes, bones weaken, focus disappears, and perhaps most damaging, your sense of self begins to dissolve. Testosterone, for all its hype, isn't just about libido. It's about identity, confidence, memory, vitality. It's the signal that tells your brain, you matter. You're still in the game. But here's the good news, and it's real. You can stop the slide. You can start today. You don't need expensive treatments or complicated regimens. You need consistency, intention, and the courage to break the silence around this. Which brings me to you. If you've made it this far into this video, you're already different. You're already searching for truth, not cliches. And that deserves something honest in return. So here's what I'm going to ask. Not like every other video out there telling you to like and subscribe. That's not what this is. This is a conversation that matters. And if it resonated with you, if even one sentence in this story reminded you of someone you know, or something you felt in your own skin, I invite you to stay connected. Leave a comment sharing something you were never told about your body, something you had to learn the hard way. And yes, if you believe more men deserve to hear this without shame, then hit subscribe, not for me, but so we can build a space where men can speak about their health without pretending they're okay when they're not. We don't need more noise. We need more truth. Are you with me? There's a kind of discomfort older men often live with in silence. Not pain exactly, more like a weight, a low, dull pressure in the lower abdomen, a strange, persistent urge to urinate, even when the bladder is nearly empty, or maybe a weak stream, difficulty starting, or that frustrating need to wake up 3-4 times a night just to go. Men often assume it's just the bladder acting up. But more often than not, it's not the bladder at all. It's the prostate. And in many cases, it's not disease. It's congestion. Let me explain. The prostate is a muscular gland that sits just below your bladder. Its job is to produce and store a significant portion of the fluid that becomes semen. When you're younger and more sexually active, that fluid is regularly flushed out. But as sexual activity decreases, or stops entirely, that fluid begins to stagnate. And here's where the problem starts. That fluid isn't designed to sit still. When it remains trapped, it thickens. The prostate swells slightly. Inflammation begins. And over time, that slow pressure builds into discomfort, disrupted sleep, reduced urinary flow, and sometimes even chronic pelvic pain. One of my patients, 73 years old and a retired postal worker, told me he thought he had a bladder infection for over a year. He'd gone through 3 different antibiotics before anyone thought to check his prostate. When I asked about his sexual history, he admitted he hadn't had any activity, alone or with a partner, for nearly 6 years. It didn't feel important anymore, he said. But the truth was, his prostate was full. After just a few weeks of introducing regular, light stimulation and release into his routine, nothing excessive, just natural, his symptoms began to fade. Within 3 months, he was sleeping through the night again. No medication, no surgery, just movement. This is something I wish more men were taught in their 40s and 50s. That ejaculation, especially in later life, is not just about sex. It's about maintenance. Like stretching your joints or walking to keep circulation going, it's a biological cleaning mechanism. There's even clinical research behind this. Studies, including a well-cited one from the University of Western Ontario, have suggested that regular ejaculation may reduce the long-term risk of prostate enlargement and even certain forms of cancer. Why? Because release reduces inflammation. It clears stagnation. It tells the body, this gland still has a job to do. But when that job is ignored for years, the gland rebels. Slowly, quietly, until it becomes impossible to ignore. Men come to me with symptoms they call just aging. But more often than not, they've simply stopped giving their body the signal to stay alive in that area. And the result is unnecessary suffering. Some of them require medication, others need physical therapy. In the worst cases, surgery. But in many situations, this could have been prevented. And it's not about being obsessed with pleasure. It's about respecting function. The prostate, like any organ, needs flow. It needs purpose. Let me be clear about something. I'm not suggesting that every man needs to pursue intimacy for the sake of ego or performance. This is about longevity. This is about self-care. And perhaps more importantly, it's about connection. Because here's where the deepest impact happens. When a man stops engaging in pleasure completely, the changes aren't just physical, they're emotional, spiritual, existential. I've spoken with widowers, divorcees, and longtime singles who tell me the same thing. They feel like something inside them is shrinking. They stop noticing their own body. They lose the spark. They avoid mirrors. They stop reaching out to old friends. Not because they're ashamed, but because they're becoming invisible to themselves. And that invisibility doesn't start in the mind. It starts in the nervous system. When you stimulate your body, even briefly, your brain releases a cascade of neurochemicals: dopamine, which brings motivation; oxytocin, which brings warmth; endorphins, which reduce stress; testosterone, which brings drive. Without these, your mind enters a kind of quiet decay. You may not feel bad exactly. You just feel distant. One man described it to me like this: "It's like I'm living inside someone else's story. Like the pages stop turning, and I'm stuck reading the same line over and over." He was 68, single, and thought intimacy was simply a young man's pursuit. But when we rebuilt his relationship with himself, slowly, respectfully, over several months, his entire sense of self shifted. He reconnected with music. He rejoined a local community group. He even started dating again. The key wasn't romance. It was remembrance. Because the truth is, you don't need someone else to bring you back to life. Your body already knows how. You've just been told to ignore the signs. Now, as we enter the second half of this journey, I want you to remember something important. This isn't about going back to who you were. It's about returning to what still lives in you. That spark, the one that once made you feel proud, alive, awake. It's still there. It's not a memory. It's a mechanism. And you can reignite it. There's a moment that breaks my heart every time it happens. A man sits across from me, maybe in his late 60s, maybe 75. He's dressed neatly, speaks calmly. There's no panic in his voice, no outward sign of distress. But when I ask him, "How are you feeling in yourself lately?" something in his eyes falters. He hesitates, then quietly says, "I don't know." It's not confusion, it's disconnection. This is one of the most under-discussed consequences of quitting self-intimacy in older age: emotional fragmentation. You see, when you no longer engage in any form of physical pleasure, not out of choice, but because you assume it no longer matters, your mind begins to mirror that withdrawal. It starts to dim its attention. You become less curious about yourself, less interested in your well-being. You stop checking in with your body. You start skipping the details. And over time, something very specific begins to fade: your sense of value. Most men don't realize this because it doesn't feel dramatic. It's subtle: a dulling of color, a lack of music in the background. Life goes on, but it feels like you're watching it instead of participating in it. This isn't about depression, though the two can overlap. It's about the loss of embodied identity, the feeling that you inhabit yourself fully, that you still deserve attention, still deserve care, still deserve pleasure, not in the erotic sense, but in the human sense. I had a patient once, 71, former high school counselor. He'd spent a lifetime helping others. After retirement, he told me his days felt fine, but his nights felt blank. He hadn't been intimate with himself or anyone else for nearly a decade. Not because he couldn't, but because he thought it would be silly. He used that word, silly. But what he was really doing was rejecting his own humanity. Over time, that rejection became habit. And that habit became grief. A grief that no one could see, but that showed up in everything, in his silence, in the way he folded his hands too tightly, in the way he deflected every compliment. When we slowly reintroduced the idea that self-intimacy wasn't indulgent, it was maintenance, he began to shift. He said, "I didn't realize how much I missed myself." That line still echoes in my mind. Because self-intimacy isn't just about function, it's about presence. When you ignore your body for too long, your mind begins to believe you no longer matter. And the result isn't just loneliness. It's a kind of internal exile, a slow fade into irrelevance. But it doesn't have to be that way. Even small, respectful gestures of care toward your body, stroking your arm, taking a slow breath, engaging in solo intimacy without guilt, send a powerful message to your brain. I'm still here. I still count. This message rewires more than you think. It helps stabilize your emotions. It grounds your thoughts. It increases serotonin levels, which help with mood. It boosts oxytocin, which improves social bonding, even if you're alone. And most of all, it restores confidence. Not the kind you show off, the kind that lets you look in the mirror and recognize the man looking back. This kind of quiet emotional vitality is what keeps men sharp. It's what helps them keep engaging with the world, with family, with new hobbies, with challenges. When you feel alive inside, the outside begins to follow. I've seen men take up painting again. I've seen others join hiking groups, travel solo, or finally take that long-postponed trip to the coast. None of them were seeking sexual conquest. They were simply remembering that they had a right to feel like they existed. Pleasure wasn't the goal. Reconnection was. And if this is starting to sound more emotional than medical, let me assure you, this is backed by biology. Dopamine, oxytocin, testosterone, serotonin, and endorphins all form a web of neurochemical balance that relies on consistent internal stimulation. Remove that stimulation, and the web loosens. Tension increases. Motivation drops. This is not about lust. It's about aliveness. And every man, every human, deserves to feel alive, no matter their age, relationship status, or physical ability. If you're still here watching this, it means some part of this truth is waking up in you. That's good. That's brave. So let me leave you with this before we continue to the final health risk, the one even many doctors won't tell you about. Self-intimacy isn't about sex. It's about staying in your body long enough to remember who you are. And that is something no one, not time, not society, not shame, can take away from you. There's one final consequence we haven't talked about yet. It's not as poetic as lost confidence or fading identity. It's not as immediate as low testosterone or weakened circulation. But it's the most dangerous of them all, because it hides behind polite silence. And by the time it's visible, it might already be too late. I'm talking about long-term prostate complications, including the one no one likes to say aloud, cancer risk. Now, before we go any further, let's be clear. Abstaining from sexual activity doesn't directly cause prostate cancer. That would be irresponsible science. But the absence of ejaculation for long periods of time, especially in men over 60, can lead to a biological environment that's more vulnerable to inflammation, congestion, and cellular mutation. Let's unpack that. Your prostate doesn't just store fluid, it processes waste. It filters out toxins, keeps your semen nourished, and flushes things that don't belong. When that system is active, it stays clean. But when it's dormant, when there's no regular release, things accumulate, fluid stagnates, proteins thicken, internal pressure builds, cells become inflamed. Over time, that inflammation can lead to tissue damage, and in some men, precancerous changes. One of the more quietly impactful studies on this was conducted at a research center in Pennsylvania. They followed over 1,800 men for 2 decades, comparing frequency of ejaculation with long-term prostate outcomes. The data was clear. Men who maintained regular release, solo or partnered, had significantly lower rates of advanced prostate issues. The theory is simple. Motion keeps the system clean. Stagnation invites trouble. This is why I often say, ejaculation isn't indulgence, it's elimination. It's one of the few natural detoxification processes men have access to, completely for free and totally under their control. But far too many men are never told this. One man I treated, 74 years old and an ex-aircraft technician, came to me after a sharp spike in his PSA levels. He'd gone over 8 years without any sexual activity, no stimulation, no release, no touch. He thought it was the noble thing to do. He was widowed and he didn't feel right engaging in pleasure without a partner. By the time we discovered the problem, his prostate was significantly enlarged. Not malignant, thankfully, but so inflamed that it was pressing on his bladder, causing frequent urgency, nighttime waking, and discomfort during sitting. He needed 6 months of therapy to restore balance. And while his case resolved, he told me afterward, "No one ever told me that letting myself go could put me in danger." That's the tragedy. We've framed male intimacy as a young man's game, or worse, as something shameful when practiced in solitude. And because of that, thousands of older men are walking around with swollen, irritated, sometimes precancerous prostates, when a simple, natural, respectful routine could have made all the difference. Now, is self-intimacy a magic shield against all illness? Of course not. But when it comes to prostate health, the research is clear. Movement helps. Stimulation matters. Release reduces pressure. Consistency reduces risk. I've even had patients whose biopsy recommendations were postponed after weeks of regular activity brought their PSA levels down naturally. No drugs, no supplements, just restoration of flow. And yet, no one talks about this. Why? Because male health, especially in the context of sexuality, has been wrapped in shame, silence, and outdated beliefs for generations. We've taught men that letting go of pleasure is maturity, that real men age with quiet dignity, that craving connection with your own body is something to outgrow. But here's what I've learned after 30 years in medicine. Dignity is not about withdrawal, it's about awareness. Strength is not about silence, it's about attention. And real wisdom is not about denial, it's about care. Because your body isn't done yet, your heart isn't done yet, your life isn't done yet. And the parts of you that once brought you energy, pride, clarity, they're not gone. They're just waiting to be remembered. So if you've been struggling with discomfort, urgency, pressure, or even the sense that something feels off deep in your body, don't ignore it. Don't assume it's just what happens at this age. It's not. It's communication, your body asking to be acknowledged. Sometimes the greatest form of healing begins not with a prescription, but with permission. Permission to touch, to feel, to restore, to come home to yourself. We've covered a lot so far. From vascular changes to hormonal decline, from emotional disconnection to prostate inflammation. And now, this, perhaps the most overlooked danger of all, the risk that silence might cost you more than just comfort. It might cost you health, but you're not too late. Because if you're still here, reading or watching, there's one thing I know for sure. You're still listening. And that means you're still willing, still capable, still powerful. You're not done. You're just starting over, with more wisdom, and this time, without the shame. So here we are, the end of the road, or maybe the start of something that was waiting quietly to begin again. By now you've heard what few men are ever told, that your vitality doesn't disappear with age, it fades with neglect, that abstaining from self-intimacy isn't always a virtue, it can become a silent threat, and that honoring your body, even in solitude, isn't shameful. It's life-affirming. I've met hundreds of men who thought they were just getting old, when really, they were just slowly unplugging from the very systems designed to keep them whole. Circulation, hormones, prostate function, emotional presence, self-worth, all of it tied together, powered by a signal we were taught to shut down. You didn't do anything wrong. You just weren't told the whole truth. But now that you know, you have a choice. You can choose to pretend this conversation didn't matter, that it was too late, that it doesn't apply to you. Or you can choose something different, something radical for a man your age. You can choose to feel again. And no, I'm not talking about lust or fantasy or some outdated version of masculinity that doesn't serve anyone. I'm talking about the quiet, private act of reconnecting with your body, not because anyone is watching, but because you still belong in it. I'm talking about closing the bathroom door, placing a hand on your chest, and remembering that you are not finished, that this skin, this breath, this heartbeat, they are still yours, and they still matter. Whether you're 61 or 89, whether you've been celibate for a month or 15 years, whether you're in a relationship, divorced, widowed, or flying solo, none of that disqualifies you from the right to aliveness. Let me say that again. You are not disqualified. You don't need permission to return to yourself. You need practice, and patience, and a little courage. Start small, 5 minutes, twice a week. Not for release, for recognition. Touch your body like it belongs to you, because it does. Let your mind receive the message that you still count, that you are still here, and that you are worth staying connected to. Because when you do, something remarkable happens. Your energy begins to return, not like a flood, but like the slow filling of a well. Your sleep deepens, your memory sharpens, your mood steadies. You look in the mirror and see someone you remember, not a stranger. And maybe, just maybe, you smile again without needing a reason. This is the truth we were never given permission to speak aloud. That pleasure, presence, and identity are not just for the young. They're for anyone brave enough to keep choosing themselves. So if this message moved you, if it stirred something in you that's been sleeping, I'm not going to beg you to subscribe to this channel, but I will offer you an invitation. Subscribe not for numbers, but because we need more spaces where men can hear the truth without filters, where we stop pretending aging means disappearing, where we build a community of men who still give a damn about their bodies, their stories, and their futures. And here's something even more important than subscribing. Tell us your story. What have you gone through that no one warned you about? What did you believe that turned out to be wrong? What have you relearned, reclaimed, or reawakened about yourself? Drop it in the comments. Not for attention, for the man reading silently who might see himself in your words and realize he's not alone. Let's start something here. A conversation not about ego, but about energy. Not about performance, but presence. Not about fantasy, but about coming home. You made it to the end, and that tells me something about you. You're not done. You're evolving, and you deserve to feel alive in your own skin, without shame, without apology, and without waiting another decade. So here's to your return, to your rhythm, to your body, to your joy. Welcome back, my friend. We've been waiting for you.